The dust swirled around the ramshackle saloon as another tumbleweed rolled past its weathered doors. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the stench of unwashed bodies. 16-year-old Sarah clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, her green eyes darting nervously between the rough men who leered at her from across the dimly lit room. Her stepfather, Jake Morrison, sat hunched over a bottle of whiskey at a corner table, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the amber liquid that had become his only companion since her mother's death 6 months ago. Sarah had watched him deteriorate from a man who once showed her kindness into a bitter drunk who saw her as nothing more than a burden. "Please, Jake," she whispered, approaching his table with trembling hands. "Let's go home. Mrs. Henderson said she'd give me work at the general store. I can earn money for us." Jake's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Work? Girl, you think that pittance would keep us fed?" He gestured wildly with his bottle, causing several drops to splash onto the scarred wooden table. "I got debts, Sarah Big debts to men who don't take kindly to waiting." The saloon doors swung open with a violent crash, and 3 men entered. Their leader, a heavy-set man with a gold tooth and a scar running down his left cheek, scanned the room until his eyes settled on Jake's table. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice as she recognized Silas Crenshaw, the most feared loan shark in 3 counties. "Morrison!" Crenshaw's voice cut through the saloon's chatter like a knife. "Time's up." Jake's hands shook as he set down his bottle. "Silas, I just need another week. I got prospects." "You got nothing but excuses," Crenshaw interrupted, his cold eyes shifting to Sarah "But maybe we can work something out." He circled her slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Pretty little thing, ain't she? Clean her up, and she'd fetch a good price in the mining camps up north." Sarah heart hammered against her ribs. "Jake, no, please, you can't." $50, Crenshaw said, pulling out a small leather pouch that clinked with coins. "That's more than generous for a girl with no family and no prospects." Jake's eyes fixed on the money, and Sarah saw something die in his gaze. The last remnant of the man who had once braided her hair and told her stories was replaced by desperate greed. She's a good girl," Jake stammered, reaching for the pouch with trembling fingers. "Works hard, don't cause no trouble." "Jake, please." Sarah grabbed his arm, tears streaming down her face. "I'm all you have left of Mama. She made you promise to take care of me." For a moment, Jake hesitated, and Sarah thought she saw a flicker of the man he used to be. But then Crenshaw shook the pouch, and the sound of coins sealed her fate. "Deal," Jake whispered, snatching the money and avoiding Sarah horrified gaze. Crenshaw's men moved forward, but before they could reach her, the saloon doors exploded inward. A mountain of a man filled the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking out the afternoon sun. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with long dark hair tied back and a beard that spoke of months in the wilderness. His buckskin clothing was well worn but clean, and a massive hunting knife hung at his side. "Seems like I walked into something unpleasant," the stranger said, his deep voice carrying a quiet authority that made every man in the saloon take notice. Crenshaw turned to face the newcomer, his hand instinctively moving to the gun at his hip. "This ain't your concern, mountain man. Best you turn around and head back to whatever hole you crawled out of." The stranger's steel-gray eyes swept the room, taking in every detail before settling on Sarah tear-stained face. Something shifted in his expression, a hardening that made even Crenshaw's men step back slightly. "Name's Ezra Stone," he said calmly, stepping fully into the saloon. "And I make it my business when I see a child being sold like livestock." "She ain't no child," Crenshaw snarled. "She's 16, old enough to work, and her guardian here just made a legal transaction." Ezra's gaze shifted to Jake, who was clutching the pouch of coins like a lifeline. "That true, mister? You're selling this girl?" Jake couldn't meet his eyes. I got debts, ain't got no choice." "There's always a choice," Ezra said quietly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet thick with bills. "How much does he owe you?" Crenshaw's eyes widened at the sight of the money. $200, but the deal's already done." No deal's done until the girl's in your hands, Ezra replied, counting out bills. Here's your 200 plus 50 for your trouble. Consider the debt paid. The saloon fell silent except for the ticking of an old clock behind the bar. Crenshaw stared at the money, clearly torn between greed and the principle of the matter. His reputation depended on following through with his threats. "You don't understand, Stone," Crenshaw said slowly. "I can't let word get out that some mountain hermit can just waltz in and undo my business. Bad for my reputation." Ezra nodded thoughtfully. "I understand reputation. Mine's built on being left alone to live in peace, but it's also built on what happens to men who threaten children in my presence." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Crenshaw's men shifted nervously, their hands hovering near their weapons. Everyone in the territory had heard stories about Ezra Stone, how he'd single-handedly fought off a pack of wolves, how he could track a man across solid rock, how he'd once killed 3 claim jumpers with nothing but his knife. "You threatening me, Stone?" Crenshaw asked, his voice tight. "Just stating facts," Ezra replied. "Take the money and walk away. The girl stays free." Sarah Mee watched the standoff with bated breath. She'd never seen anyone stand up to Silas Crenshaw before. Men twice Ezra's size had backed down from the loan shark's threats, but the mountain man stood calm and unmoved, like a granite cliff facing a storm. Crenshaw's hand twitched toward his gun, but one of his men grabbed his arm. "Boss," the man whispered urgently, "remember what happened to the Garrett brothers when they crossed him." The reminder seemed to deflate Crenshaw's bravado. He snatched the money from Ezra's outstretched hand and stuffed it into his coat. "This ain't over, Stone. Nobody makes Silas Crenshaw look like a fool. Only fool I see is a man who'd rather make enemies than take easy money," Ezra replied evenly. Crenshaw and his men backed toward the door, their eyes never leaving Ezra. "You watch yourself, mountain man. These mountains can be dangerous for a man living alone." After they left, the saloon slowly returned to its normal buzz of conversation. Ezra turned to Jake, who was staring at the returned pouch of coins in confusion. "That money's blood money now," Ezra said quietly. "You touch it, and you're no better than the men who would have hurt that girl." Jake's face crumpled. I didn't know what else to do. They would have killed me." "Maybe," Ezra acknowledged. "But selling a child to save your own skin, that's not living, mister, that's just breathing." He turned to Sarah Mee, who stood frozen in shock. "You got anywhere to go, girl?" She shook her head mutely, still unable to believe what had just happened. "Well then," Ezra said, his voice gentling, "I reckon you better come with me. My cabin's got room for one more, and these mountains are no place for a young woman alone." Sarah Mee looked back at Jake one last time. He sat slumped over his whiskey, the weight of his betrayal crushing down on him like a landslide. She felt a mixture of pity and disgust, but mostly just emptiness where her trust used to be. "Why?" she asked Ezra as they prepared to leave. "Why did you help me? You don't even know me." Ezra paused at the saloon doors, his weathered face thoughtful. "Had a sister once, about your age when she died. Promised myself I'd never stand by and watch another young woman suffer if I could prevent it." As they stepped out into the dusty street, Sarah Mee felt the first glimmer of hope she'd experienced in months. The mountain man beside her was a stranger, but he'd shown her more kindness in 10 minutes than her stepfather had in 6 months. The journey to Ezra's cabin took them through some of the most beautiful and treacherous terrain Sarah Mee had ever seen. They rode for hours through winding mountain paths, past rushing streams and towering pine forests that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. Ezra had provided her with a gentle mare named Buttercup, and he rode a massive black stallion that seemed as wild and untamed as its master. "How long have you lived up here?" Sarah Mee asked as they paused to rest the horses beside a crystal-clear mountain stream. "Going on 8 years now," Ezra replied, filling their water bottles from the stream. "Came up here after the war ended. Needed somewhere quiet to heal." Sarah Mee noticed the way his eyes grew distant when he mentioned the war, and she didn't press for details. She'd seen that same look in other men's eyes, the haunted expression of those who'd seen too much death and destruction. "Aren't you lonely?" she asked instead. Ezra considered the question as he helped her down from her horse. Loneliness and solitude are different things, girl. I chose solitude. Loneliness is what happens when you're surrounded by people who don't understand you. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Sarah Mee began to understand why Ezra had chosen this place. The air was clean and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers. Eagles soared overhead, and she caught glimpses of deer and elk moving through the forest. It was a world away from the dusty, desperate town below. There, Ezra said as they crested a ridge. Home. Sarah Mee gasped at the sight before her. Nestled in a small valley surrounded by towering peaks was the most beautiful cabin she'd ever seen. It was larger than she'd expected, built from massive logs that had been fitted together with obvious skill and care. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and a vegetable garden flourished beside the structure. A small barn housed several animals, and she could see chickens pecking in a fenced yard. "You built all this yourself?" she asked in amazement. "Most of it," Ezra replied with a hint of pride. "Took me 3 years to get it just right. Had to learn carpentry, masonry, farming, all sorts of skills I never needed in my old life." As they approached the cabin, Sarah Mee noticed the careful attention to detail everywhere she looked. The porch was swept clean, with handmade furniture arranged invitingly. Flower boxes under the windows overflowed with colorful blooms. It was clear that despite his rough exterior, Ezra Stone was a man who appreciated beauty and order. "I should warn you," Ezra said as he helped her dismount. "I'm not used to company. Been living alone so long, I might not be the best host." "You've already been kinder to me than anyone has in months," Sarah Mee replied softly. "I don't expect anything more than a safe place to sleep." Ezra's expression softened. "You'll have that and more, girl. Come on, let me show you around." The interior of the cabin was even more impressive than the exterior. The main room featured a massive stone fireplace with comfortable chairs arranged around it. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on everything from agriculture to philosophy. A large wooden table dominated the center of the room, clearly handmade and polished to a warm glow. "You read?" Ezra asked, noticing her interest in the books. "Some," Sarah Mee admitted. "Mama taught me before she died, but we didn't have many books." "Well, you've got plenty now," Ezra said. "Help yourself to any of them. Knowledge is the one thing that gets more valuable the more you share it." He showed her to a small but comfortable bedroom that had obviously been prepared for a guest. The bed was made with clean linens, and wildflowers in a mason jar sat on the windowsill. A wash basin and pitcher of fresh water waited on a small table. "This was meant to be my sister's room," Ezra said quietly. "Never got the chance to use it for its intended purpose." Sarah Mee felt tears prick her eyes at the sadness in his voice. "What happened to her?" "Fever took her the winter before I finished building this place," Ezra replied. "She was supposed to come live with me after our parents died. Guess fate had other plans." That evening, as they sat around the fireplace after a simple but delicious dinner of venison stew and fresh bread, Sarah Mee began to understand the man who had saved her. Ezra Stone was not the rough, uneducated mountain man she'd expected. He spoke with intelligence and sensitivity, and his cabin was filled with evidence of a cultured mind. "You weren't always a mountain man, were you?" she asked as he whittled a piece of wood into what looked like a small bird. Ezra smiled slightly. "No, I wasn't. Used to be a teacher, believe it or not. Taught at a school back in Missouri before the war. Had plans to marry my sweetheart, raise a family, live a quiet life." "What changed?" "War changes everything," Ezra said simply. "Came back a different man than the one who left. My fiancée took one look at me and knew we could never be what we once were. Can't say I blamed her." Sarah Mee watched him work, marveling at the skill with which he shaped the wood. "Do you ever regret coming up here?" "Not for a minute," Ezra replied firmly. "This place saved my life, gave me purpose again, and now," he looked at her with a gentle smile, "now it's given me a chance to honor my sister's memory by helping someone who needs it." As Sarah Mee settled into her new bed that night, She felt something she hadn't experienced in months: safety. For the first time since her mother's death, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The mountain man who had rescued her was proving to be far more than she'd ever dared hope for, not just a protector, but perhaps the family she'd lost. Outside her window, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, and she fell asleep to the sound of nature's lullaby, finally at peace. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah Mee's arrival at the mountain cabin, and she had begun to settle into a routine that felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived since her mother's death. Each morning, she helped Ezra tend to the animals and garden, learning skills she'd never imagined she'd need. In the afternoons, he taught her to read from his extensive library, and in the evenings, they would sit by the fire while he shared stories of his travels and the history of the mountains. But their peaceful existence was shattered one crisp October morning, when the sound of approaching horses echoed through the valley. Sarah Mee looked up from feeding the chickens to see a group of riders cresting the ridge, and her blood turned to ice when she recognized the lead figure. Silas Crenshaw had returned, and this time he'd brought more men. "Ezra," she called, running toward the cabin where he was splitting wood. "They're coming." Ezra's head snapped up, his eyes immediately scanning the approaching riders. His expression hardened as he counted at least 8 men, all armed and riding with purpose. "Get inside," he ordered, setting down his axe and moving toward the cabin. "Stay away from the windows." "What do they want?" Sarah Mee asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "Me," Ezra replied grimly. "And probably you too. Crenshaw's not the type to let a slight go unanswered." The riders pulled up in front of the cabin, their horses snorting and pawing the ground. Crenshaw sat his mount with the confidence of a man who held all the cards, a cruel smile playing across his scarred face. "Well, well," Crenshaw called out. "The famous Ezra Stone, living like a king up here in his mountain palace. Must be nice having all this space to yourself." Ezra stepped onto the porch, his hand resting casually on the handle of his knife. "You're trespassing, Crenshaw. I suggest you turn around and head back down the mountain." "Oh, I don't think so," Crenshaw replied, dismounting slowly. "You see, you cost me a lot of money and respect back in town. Word's gotten around that Silas Crenshaw can be pushed around by any mountain hermit with a few dollars. That's bad for business." "Your reputation's your own problem," Ezra said evenly. "The girl stays here," Crenshaw laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the surrounding peaks. "The girl? Hell, Stone, I've moved past that. See, I've been doing some asking around about you. Turns out there's quite a bounty on your head." Sarah Mee felt her heart sink as she watched from the window. A bounty? What had Ezra done? "During the war," Crenshaw continued, clearly enjoying himself, "you killed a Confederate colonel named Marcus Whitfield. Problem is, Whitfield had a brother, a very wealthy brother who's been looking for his killer for years. $5,000, Stone. That's what your head is worth." Ezra's face remained impassive, but Sarah Mee could see the tension in his shoulders. Whitfield was a war criminal. He was executing prisoners. "Maybe so," Crenshaw shrugged. "But his brother don't see it that way. And $5,000 is $5,000. The truth hit Sarah Mee like a physical blow. Ezra hadn't just been a soldier. He'd been forced to make impossible choices in an impossible war. And now those choices were coming back to haunt him. "You got 2 options, Stone," Crenshaw continued. "Come with us peaceful-like and we'll make it quick, or we can do this the hard way and the girl gets hurt in the process." "There's a third option," Ezra said quietly. "Yeah, what's that?" "You and your men ride out of here right now, and I pretend this conversation never happened." Crenshaw's laughter was even harsher this time. 8 against 1, Stone. Even you ain't that good." What happened next would be burned into Sarah Mee's memory forever. Ezra moved with a speed and precision that seemed almost supernatural. His knife appeared in his hand as if by magic, and he threw it with deadly accuracy, catching one of Crenshaw's men in the shoulder and sending him tumbling from his horse. The mountain man dove behind a stack of firewood as the remaining men opened fire, bullets splintering the wood around him. But Ezra had spent years learning every inch of his property, and he used that knowledge to his advantage. He moved like a ghost through the terrain he knew by heart, appearing and disappearing among the rocks and trees. Sarah Mee watched in terror and amazement as Ezra systematically picked off Crenshaw's men. He moved with the skill of a born warrior, using the mountain itself as his ally. Within minutes, 3 men were down and the others were beginning to panic. "This is impossible," one of them shouted. "He's just one man." "He's not just a man," Crenshaw snarled, his earlier confidence evaporating. "He's a damn ghost." But even ghosts could be overwhelmed by superior numbers, and Sarah Mee could see that Ezra was beginning to tire. A bullet grazed his arm, and another shattered the window near where she was hiding. She realized with growing horror that Crenshaw was right. 8 against 1 was too many, even for someone as skilled as Ezra Stone. That's when she made a decision that would change everything. Remembering the rifle Ezra had shown her hanging above the fireplace, she grabbed it and checked to make sure it was loaded. Her mother had taught her to shoot when she was younger, and though she was rusty, desperation gave her steady hands. She positioned herself at the window and took careful aim at one of Crenshaw's men who was trying to flank Ezra's position. The rifle's report echoed through the valley, and the man cried out as her bullet found its mark. "The girl's got a gun," someone shouted, and suddenly the dynamic of the fight changed completely. The tide of battle turned with Sarah Mee's intervention. Caught between Ezra's deadly precision and her unexpected support from the cabin, Crenshaw's remaining men found themselves in an impossible position. 2 more fell to Ezra's rifle, and another was wounded by Sarah Mee's increasingly confident shooting. "Fall back!" Crenshaw screamed, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Fall back!" But Ezra wasn't about to let them retreat and regroup. He emerged from his cover like an avenging angel, his rifle speaking with deadly accuracy. Within moments, only Crenshaw and 1 other man remained mounted, the rest either dead, wounded, or fleeing on foot down the mountain. "This ain't over, Stone," Crenshaw shouted as he wheeled his horse around. "That bounty's still on your head. Others will come." "Let them come," Ezra replied calmly, reloading his rifle. "They'll find the same welcome you did." As the sound of retreating hoofbeats faded into the distance, Sarah Mee emerged from the cabin on shaking legs. The reality of what had just happened, what she had just done, hit her like a landslide. She had shot a man. She had killed to protect the person who had become her family. "You did good, girl," Ezra said softly, taking the rifle from her trembling hands. "Saved both our lives." "I killed someone," she whispered, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. "You protected your home," Ezra corrected gently. "Sometimes that's what it takes to survive in this world." Over the following days, as they buried the dead and repaired the damage to their property, Sarah Mee and Ezra grew even closer. The shared experience of defending their home had forged a bond between them that went deeper than mere gratitude or obligation. They were family now, in every way that mattered. "Will more bounty hunters come?" Sarah Mee asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "Probably," Ezra admitted. "But we'll be ready for them, and besides," he smiled at her, "I'm not alone anymore. That makes all the difference." As winter approached, they worked together to prepare their mountain home for the cold months ahead. Sarah Mee had learned to hunt, to preserve food, to read the weather signs that Ezra taught her. She had also continued her education, devouring every book in his library and engaging him in discussions that reminded him why he had once loved teaching. "You know," Ezra said one snowy evening as they worked on a puzzle together, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" Sarah Mee asked, looking up from the piece she was trying to fit. "About making this official. Adopting you, I mean. Making you my legal daughter." Sarah Mee's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "You do that, even with the bounty on your head, even knowing it might put me in danger, especially because of those things," Ezra replied firmly. "You deserve a name, a family, a future, and he paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd have a family again. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." Spring came early that year, bringing with it wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. Sarah Mee Stone, for that was her name now, legally and officially, stood on the porch of their cabin, watching Ezra work in the garden they had expanded together. The bounty hunters had come twice more over the winter, but each time they had been turned away by the mountain man and his fierce young daughter. Word was spreading through the territory that Ezra Stone was not a man to be trifled with, and that his mountain home was a fortress that could not be taken. "Papa," Sarah Mee called, using the name that had come naturally to both of them. "Mrs. Henderson sent word that she's got mail for us in town." Ezra looked up from his planting, soil on his hands and contentment in his eyes. "Reckon we can make the trip tomorrow. Been meaning to pick up supplies anyway." As they rode down the mountain path the next morning, Sarah Mee reflected on how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been a frightened, abandoned girl with no future and no hope. Now she was the daughter of one of the most respected men in the territory, educated, confident, and secure in the knowledge that she was loved and protected. The letter waiting for them in town brought news that would change their lives once more. Marcus Whitfield's brother had died, and with him, the bounty on Ezra's head. They were finally, truly free to live their lives without looking over their shoulders. "What do you say we celebrate?" Ezra suggested as they read the letter together. "Maybe take a trip to Denver, see some of the world beyond these mountains." Sarah Mee smiled, but her answer surprised him. "I'd like that, Papa, but I want to come back here. This is home now." Ezra's answering smile was brighter than the mountain sun. "Yes, it is, and it always will be." As they rode back up the mountain together, father and daughter, Sarah Mee knew that she had found something more precious than gold in these peaks. She had found love, family, and a place where she truly belonged. The stepfather who had sold her for a bottle of whiskey was a distant memory now, replaced by a man who had given her everything that mattered: a home, a name, and a future filled with endless possibilities.